Everyone believed Sophia was just another civilian wandering into a world she barely understood. She arrived at the Riverside shooting range on a Tuesday morning, driving an old compact car that looked completely out of place between the towering military trucks. Her navy sweater and faded jeans were hardly the attire of a professional marksman. The soldiers who passed her barely noticed, assuming she was here for the novelty of shooting a rifle once or twice. The front desk sergeant raised an eyebrow when she signed in. He looked at her papers with faint amusement and said it was an unusual day to begin learning. The Army was conducting advanced training for its reconnaissance division, and the air inside the facility was already humming with strict orders and bursts of live fire from the range beyond. Sophia simply nodded, her expression calm. She had been told this was the best place to learn precision shooting. She had not been told she would be sharing space with some of the most skilled soldiers in the country. She was assigned to Lane 12, pushed far to the edge of the massive concrete floor that stretched with targets lined at distances climbing past 1,000 meters. The sound of rifles cracked rhythmically from the other side where the uniformed men and women drilled under the watchful eyes of commanders. Sophia placed her bag on the bench and stood still for a moment, letting the thunder of shots roll over her. Watching the clean precision with which the soldiers moved, these were not hobbyists. These were professionals shaped by years of discipline and repetition. The instructor approached her after a few minutes. His name was Robert, his face warmed by decades of sun and gunpowder. He carried a rifle case with him and moved with the casual confidence of someone who no longer needed to prove anything to anyone. Sophia greeted him politely and thanked him for making time. He opened the case and revealed a standard training rifle, plain and unremarkable to the untrained eye, but precise enough for what they needed. He asked why she had chosen to begin with rifles instead of pistols like most beginners. Sophia answered in her quiet way that she wanted something more demanding, something that required real focus. Robert nodded and handed her safety glasses and ear guards. He began explaining grip, stance, and breathing. His voice was steady even as the military unit behind them erupted with another volley of shots. At first he thought she seemed distracted by the noise, but he soon realized she was listening with an intensity that surprised him. She asked questions, not many, but the few she spoke revealed she already understood things beyond what most beginners grasped. When he set up a target at 100 meters, Sophia moved into position smoothly. The way she settled her shoulder, the subtle adjustment of her cheek against the stock, even the small correction she made to the scope, all of it felt natural. Robert reminded her to breathe steady and squeeze gently. She fired, the crack rang out, and when Robert checked the target through binoculars, his breath caught. The shot was in the very center. Beginner's luck, he muttered, trying to convince himself. He moved the target further, 200 meters, then 300. Every shot found its mark with unnerving precision. Soldiers on break began drifting toward Lane 12, drawn by the growing murmur. By the time she was aiming at the 500-meter target, nearly a dozen eyes were on her. Robert's suspicion grew. In 30 years of instruction, he had never seen someone new to rifles hit like this. He asked carefully if she had ever trained before. She answered with calm simplicity that she had not, though her tone carried something unspoken. Whispers ran through the soldiers watching. One muttered that nobody shoots like that without serious training. Another laughed uneasily and said even competition marksmen struggle with such distances. Still, Sophia remained focused, her movements methodical and free of hesitation. She treated each shot like a small ritual. Her breathing slowed, her hands relaxed, and the bullet flew exactly where she wanted it to. By the time the fifth target rang, the entire section of the range seemed to pause. Soldiers who were supposed to be engaged in drills found their eyes wandering to the civilian in jeans at the far lane. Even the instructors on the military side could no longer ignore what was unfolding at the elevated deck above them. Colonel Michael, who had been overseeing the day's training, lowered his binoculars and frowned. His aide whispered urgently that the woman was out shooting their best. Professionals, at first Michael dismissed it as exaggeration, but when the aide reported she had struck a bullseye at 500 meters on her first attempt, his demeanor changed. He rose and began making his way down to the floor, his presence stirring unease as soldiers shifted and cleared a path. Sophia adjusted her scope once more, oblivious to the stir she was causing. To her, the world had narrowed to the quiet space between her heartbeat and the distant target. When the colonel finally reached her lane, the range had fallen silent. Soldiers held their breath, curious about what would happen when command confronted the mysterious civilian whose skill defied explanation. Colonel Michael stood tall at lane 12, his presence commanding silence across the entire shooting range. The soldiers straightened instinctively as he approached, though their eyes were fixed not on him, but on Sophia. The civilian had just demonstrated shooting that should have been impossible for a beginner. Robert shifted uneasily at her side, his years of experience warning him this was no ordinary situation. Michael studied her for a long moment. His gaze sharp, he asked Robert who she was. Robert replied that she was a student, a newcomer who had scheduled a lesson. His words sounded thin even to his own ears. Michael looked back at Sophia, his expression unreadable. He asked if he could observe her next shot. Sophia nodded calmly, showing no sign of nerves. Robert hesitated before setting up the 600-meter target. It was a distance that tested even seasoned experts. The soldiers leaned forward, the air tense. Sophia adjusted the scope for wind drift. Her movements smooth. She inhaled deeply, held her breath halfway, and squeezed a trigger. The rifle cracked. The target rang. When Michael lifted his binoculars and focused, his breath caught. The round had landed not just in the bullseye, but in its exact center. A murmur swept through the watching crowd. Some shook their heads in disbelief. Others whispered theories. Michael lowered his binoculars slowly. His face betrayed nothing, but inside his mind raced. In 15 years of service, he had witnessed such precision only a handful of times, and each of those shooters had belonged to programs so secret their existence was never acknowledged. He leaned slightly toward his aide John, his voice low. He said the shooting pattern was familiar, that it carried the mark of advanced training few in the world possessed. John frowned, insisting she was only a civilian. But Michael was unconvinced. Robert, meanwhile, could no longer pretend this was ordinary instruction. He turned to Sophia and asked in a quiet voice if she had military or law enforcement experience. Sophia shook her head, her face calm. She said she was simply someone who wanted to learn, yet her tone held a weight that suggested another layer of truth hidden beneath. The soldiers crowded closer. Staff Sergeant Brooks muttered that the student was making them all look like amateurs. Private Torres whispered harshly that nobody could shoot like that without being shaped by years of training. Their voices carried awe, envy, and suspicion. Michael finally spoke directly to Sophia. His words were measured. He said her performance was extraordinary, but extraordinary raised questions. He asked again who she really was. Sophia met his gaze for the first time. Her eyes were steady, her expression unchanged. She said she was just Sophia, nothing more. The silence between them stretched long. Every soldier present felt the tension. It was not simply about shooting anymore. It was about identity, about secrets, about the possibility that someone who looked like an ordinary woman in jeans might belong to a hidden world. Michael asked her to walk with him to a quieter corner of the range. Robert hesitated but stepped back. The colonel led Sophia away from the crowd, past the curious eyes and whispered speculation. When they stopped, his tone softened but grew more serious. He told her plainly that the technique she had displayed belonged to a place that was not supposed to exist, a place where individuals had been trained to the highest levels and then erased from official records. Sophia listened without expression. Michael continued. He said the program had been shut down years ago after a breach. Its members scattered, given new names and new lives. Each was expected to vanish completely, never again to reveal what they had learned. Michael said he believed she was one of them. For a moment she said nothing. The noise of rifles firing in the distance filled the air. At last she asked quietly, what would happen, hypothetically, if someone from such a program were discovered? Michael replied, just as quietly, they would be relocated again, given another name, another life, and asked to disappear all over. It was a cycle without end. Sophia considered this and said it sounded exhausting. Michael agreed it must be. He paused, then added that in his report, she would simply be recorded as a talented civilian with surprising natural ability. Nothing more. He said sometimes the greatest service a soldier could do was to let another retire in peace. Sophia regarded him carefully, searching for deception. For the first time, a flicker of relief passed through her eyes, barely noticeable but present. Michael had chosen not to expose her, not to drag her back into shadows she had worked so hard to escape. Still, he made a request. He said his unit could use someone of her talents, not for official duty, but as a consultant, helping with training, passing along skills without revealing her true background. Sophia tilted her head as if weighing the offer. After a moment, she replied that she might, hypothetically, consider such arrangement. Michael smiled faintly, the tension between them easing. When they returned to Lane 12, the soldiers were restless with curiosity. Robert asked cautiously if everything was sorted out. Michael assured him it was. He announced that Sophia had generously agreed to assist with advanced training scenarios, purely on a voluntary basis. The soldiers looked at one another in wonder, still uncertain what they had witnessed. Sophia lifted the rifle once more, adjusted the scope, and glanced toward Michael. She asked if he wanted to see what the equipment could truly do. Michael's eyes gleamed with interest. He said he thought she would never ask. The range grew quiet once more as Sophia prepared to demonstrate not just skill, but mastery, a mastery that would leave every soldier present with stories they would carry for the rest of their lives. The soldiers gathered close as Sophia prepared for what came next. The sun outside filtered through high windows, casting long bars of light across the concrete floor. The faint scent of oil and gunpowder hung heavy in the air. Every ear strained to hear, every eye fixed on the quiet woman who stood in jeans with a rifle resting easily in her hands. She seemed untouched by the weight of their attention, as if the crowd had melted away and only the target remained. Robert set up moving targets this time, mechanical silhouettes sliding across tracks at different speeds and distances. He expected at least some hesitation. He expected her to miss at least once. But Sophia settled in, her breathing measured, her grip steady. The first target swept across the lane. She fired, and the silhouette jolted as the round struck its exact center. Another target appeared. She shifted, fired again, another perfect hit. The rhythm of her shots was smooth, deliberate, unhurried. Each bullet found its mark. The soldiers stood frozen, murmurs rising and falling like a tide. Staff Sergeant Brooks leaned forward, muttering that even he could not manage such consistency under pressure. Private Wilson whispered that it looked less like shooting and more like some kind of art. Michael observed in silence, his expression giving away little, but inside he felt the same disbelief as the others. He had seen marksmen break under far less demanding scenarios. Yet Sophia moved as though she were conducting a slow dance with the rifle. She asked Robert to prepare more difficult conditions, targets obscured by partial cover, shadows falling across them, variable lighting that challenged the eye. Robert obeyed, half in awe, half in curiosity. Sophia adjusted her stance, fired again and again. Each obstacle that should have made the shot nearly impossible failed to slow her. She calculated without pause, bullets striking with surgical accuracy. The soldiers erupted in astonished whispers. A few exchanged glances filled with unease. They had been trained to believe they were the elite, the top of the ladder. Yet here was a woman who had walked in from the outside and shattered that illusion in a single morning. Robert finally lowered his binoculars and said nothing, because there was nothing left to say. Then Sophia did something none of them expected. Instead of simply showing off her skill, she began to teach. Her voice remained calm, steady. She spoke of breathing methods that slowed the body until the heart itself seemed quieter. She demonstrated positions beyond the textbook stances they had been drilled in. She explained mental exercises that sharpened focus and silenced the noise of doubt. The soldiers leaned in, listening, absorbing every word. Private Wilson, who had struggled with long-range accuracy for years, stepped forward. Sophia adjusted his grip, showed him how a subtle change in pressure transformed the way the rifle recoiled. He fired again, and for the first time his shot landed squarely in the center of the distant target. His expression shifted from disbelief to joy. Corporal Henderson listened as Sophia described a breathing rhythm that aligned with the trigger pull. He tried it, and suddenly his consistency improved. It was as if she could see into their minds, as if she understood instinctively what each of them needed. Private Garcia whispered to a squad mate that she seemed to know their mistakes before they made them. The soldiers who had once laughed at the idea of a civilian on their range now watched her with quiet respect. Michael noted everything carefully. He saw not only her precision, but her ability to pass it on. That was rarer than any natural skill. Leadership depended on such gifts, and here she was giving them away without demand for recognition. Sophia moved to a more challenging demonstration. 3 targets at different distances appeared in sequence. She shifted her aim rapidly, calculating bullet drop and wind drift without pause. She fired 3 times in under 15 seconds. Each round struck the exact center. The soldiers gasped as though they had witnessed something otherworldly. Even Michael felt the certainty within him harden. She was not a beginner. She was not ordinary. She belonged to the kind of program only whispered about in shadowed rooms. Robert finally broke his silence. His voice carried a mixture of awe and disbelief as he asked where she had learned this. Sophia simply replied with a single word, "Practice." She said it without hesitation, as if repetition alone explained the mastery that stunned everyone around her. Some of the soldiers chuckled, but none truly believed it. Still, they respected the answer, perhaps sensing it was the only one they would ever be given. As the afternoon stretched on, Sophia continued guiding them. She explained techniques for night shooting, how to read the play of shadows, how to anticipate the way light would shift. She spoke of compensating for weather, the subtle push of wind against a bullet in flight, the way heat distorted sight lines. Her knowledge poured out with calm precision, and the soldiers absorbed it hungrily. By the time the sun began its descent, the reconnaissance unit was transformed. Men and women who had thought they were already skilled found themselves seeing new possibilities. The air buzzed with energy, as if each of them had glimpsed the edge of something greater. Michael stepped forward once more. He told Sophia that what she had given them today would remain with them for the rest of their careers. She responded that they had earned it by being willing to learn. For the first time, a true smile crossed her face, fleeting but genuine. It was enough to remind him she was not only a weapon of precision, but a person who had once chosen to step away from that life. As the soldiers packed their equipment, whispering among themselves about the extraordinary day they had just witnessed, Michael knew one thing for certain. His decision to protect her secret had been the right one. But he also knew this was only the beginning, for the presence of Sophia would not be forgotten, not by his men, and not by himself. Evening shadows stretched long across the range as the soldiers finished storing their gear. The crack of rifles had faded, replaced by the muted clatter of cases closing and boots shifting on concrete. Yet the air still held the weight of what had happened. Whispers passed quietly among the troops, not gossip, but awe. They had seen something extraordinary, something they knew would never be recorded in manuals or reports. Sophia stood at the edge of Lane 12. Carefully cleaning the rifle she had been using. Her movements were deliberate, almost ritualistic. She wiped down the barrel, checked the action, aligned the scope with the patience of someone who respected the weapon as more than steel and wood. Robert watched her closely, his curiosity gnawing at him. He had trained countless shooters over the years, but none had moved with such seamless precision. He knew talent when he saw it, but this was something else entirely. Michael approached quietly, his boots echoing in the hushed space. He had dismissed most of the unit for the evening, though a few lingered, pretending to tidy up while sneaking glances at Sophia. He understood their curiosity. He shared it, standing near her. He spoke in a low tone meant only for her ears. He reminded her that her presence here had consequences, that her skill could not be ignored. Sophia paused in her cleaning, then replied with calm certainty that she had no intention of stepping into the spotlight. She only wished to learn, perhaps to share what she could when it seemed right. Michael studied her face. He saw no pride in her expression, no desire for recognition. Instead, he saw weariness, the kind of exhaustion that comes not from physical labor, but from years of carrying something unspoken. He recognized it. He had seen it before in veterans who carried battles inside them long after the fighting ended. Robert stepped forward then. Unable to contain himself, he asked Sophia again if she had ever served. His voice carried not accusation but genuine confusion. She lifted her gaze slowly, meeting his eyes, and said she had not. Robert wanted to press further, but Michael cut him off with a glance. Some truths, Michael thought, were not meant to be pried open. The colonel changed the subject, suggesting that perhaps Sophia might return in the future to work with his unit. Not in any official capacity, but as a consultant, helping sharpen the edges of soldiers who would soon find themselves in unforgiving places. Sophia considered the words carefully, then gave a slow nod. Not a promise, but an acknowledgement that such an arrangement might be possible. The remaining soldiers listened, their curiosity deepening. To them, it sounded like the colonel himself was entrusting their unit's growth to a civilian whose name they had never heard before today. It added to the mystery, painting Sophia as someone caught between worlds. As the last of the troops filed out, Private Garcia whispered to Henderson that it was like learning from a ghost, a figure that appeared, taught, and vanished. Henderson only nodded, unable to find better words. When the range was finally quiet, Michael walked with Sophia toward the exit. The cool evening air greeted them, the fading sunlight painting the sky in streaks of orange and purple. They paused near the row of vehicles, his military truck towering beside her modest car. The contrast felt symbolic, power and institution beside anonymity and quiet retreat. Michael told her once more that he would record nothing unusual in his report, that officially she was a gifted civilian whose shots had impressed the soldiers. Nothing more, nothing less. Sophia nodded in gratitude. Though she said nothing in that moment, a silent understanding passed between them. He would guard her secret, and in return she would lend her skill when she chose. She climbed in her car and started the engine. The hum was soft, almost fragile compared to the roar of the departing convoy. As she drove away, she glanced once in the rearview mirror, watching the soldiers disappearing into the distance. She thought of the paths they would walk, the dangers they would face, and she knew that in some small way she had already left an imprint on them. Back at his truck, Michael remained still for a long moment. His aide John approached cautiously, asking what he should write in the official record. Michael replied that he should note the presence of a civilian consultant who displayed unusual natural ability, someone who had provided valuable insight into training. John looked uncertain but obeyed. Michael's voice carried a quiet finality that left no room for doubt. In the days that followed, whispers spread quietly through military circles. Nothing official, nothing on paper, but spoken between units and shared at the edges of conversations. There was talk of a woman at Riverside Range, a civilian who could teach impossible shots and reveal methods unknown to manuals. Some dismissed it as rumor, others leaned in with fascination. The legend began to grow, even as Sophia herself slipped back into obscurity. Every Tuesday morning she returned to the range. Her presence became a quiet rhythm. She arrived early, practiced alone for a time, and then, when Michael's men were available, she worked with them, guiding their hands, steadying their nerves, teaching them to listen not only to their weapons but to themselves. She never demanded credit, never sought acknowledgement, and the soldiers never spoke of her beyond their own circle. It was as if an unspoken oath bound them together. With each passing week, Sophia shaped them more deeply. She corrected habits, encouraged patience, and taught them to read the environment as though it were part of themselves. Rain, wind, heat, and shadows became allies rather than obstacles. Her lessons stretched beyond shooting, touching discipline, resilience, and the mental calm needed when life balanced on a trigger pull. For Michael, the arrangement was a gift. His unit grew sharper, more confident, more adaptable. And yet, each time he watched Sophia demonstrate her skill, he felt the same quiet unease, a reminder that she carried a history he would never fully know. He had chosen not to press, and he would not. Still, he wondered who she had once been and why someone with such ability had chosen to vanish. The secret held, the soldiers trained, and the legend of the ghost instructor deepened. Sophia herself returned each week to her ordinary life, blending once again into the world beyond the range. Her neighbors saw only a quiet woman in simple clothes, never suspecting that each Tuesday morning she walked into a space where myths were born. Tuesday mornings at Riverside became something more than routine. They became almost sacred to the unit, a time when the ordinary dissolved and they stepped into the presence of someone who carried mastery with effortless grace. The soldiers never spoke of her outside the range, yet among themselves the whispers grew. They called her the Ghost, a teacher who appeared without warning, trained them in ways they had never imagined, and disappeared again into the quiet of civilian life. Sophia herself never thought of it that way. To her, these mornings were not about legend or reputation. They were about discipline, about sharing what she could with men and women who might one day depend on their skill in moments of impossible pressure. She arrived quietly, her car slipping between military trucks, as if it belonged. She carried no airs of authority, no signs of rank, only calm patience and an unwavering focus on the work at hand. The unit grew under her guidance. Private Wilson's long-range accuracy became a point of pride rather than frustration. Corporal Henderson, once plagued by inconsistency, now held his rifle with newfound confidence. Garcia discovered that the calm Sophia taught him could steady not just his hand, but his entire outlook on the battlefield. The soldiers felt the change deeply. It was not only their aim that improved, but their sense of self, their belief that they could accomplish what once seemed impossible. Michael watched all of this with measured satisfaction. He knew what Sophia was giving them could not be written into training manuals. It was lived knowledge, passed hand to hand, moment to moment. It was the kind of wisdom that official channels often buried under layers of protocol, and so he protected her secret fiercely. Each report he signed carried only the simplest words. A civilian consultant with natural skill had assisted with training, nothing more. Still, whispers reached him from other commands. Stories were spreading in subtle threads, always cloaked in doubt. Some officers dismissed them as exaggerations. Others leaned in, hungry to know if the ghost was real. Michael neither confirmed nor denied. His silence only added to the aura. He understood that myths could carry power, and perhaps it was better this way. Sophia continued to live quietly outside the range. Her apartment was modest, her days unremarkable. She blended easily into the flow of the city. No one who saw her at the grocery store or walking home in the late afternoon sun would guess that she spent her mornings teaching elite soldiers how to stretch the limits of precision. That was how she preferred it. Her life was built on the balance between visibility and invisibility, a careful dance that kept her free. Yet even as she embraced this quiet rhythm, she knew the colonel's offer had changed something. She was no longer only practicing for herself. She was shaping others, planting seeds that would grow long after she was gone. There was meaning in that, a sense of purpose she had not expected to find again. One Tuesday, after a long day of drills, Michael approached her as the soldiers packed up. The sky was painted with the soft colors of evening. He told her that what she had given his unit would be remembered for the rest of their careers. He said she had changed them, not just as shooters, but as people. Sophia listened, then replied simply that they had earned it, that their willingness to learn had allowed her to teach. It was not pride in her voice, but quiet truth. Michael nodded, and for a moment they stood together in silence. Two people bound by a secret neither would name aloud. He thought then of the weight she carried, the life she had once lived and abandoned. He knew the temptation to draw her back into official service would always exist, but he also knew he would resist it. For some, the greatest service was not to fight again, but to let go, to pass knowledge quietly and then fade. As the convoy rumbled away, John asked Michael what he should write in the log. Michael replied calmly that they had worked with a civilian consultant of unusual natural ability. John hesitated, then obeyed. He had learned by now not to ask more than was necessary. Sophia finished cleaning the last rifle with Robert's help. She thanked him for his patience, then walked back to her car. The drive home was uneventful, the city lights flickering to life as the sun dipped below the horizon. She parked, climbed the stairs to her apartment, and stepped into the quiet. Her neighbors greeted her in passing, unaware that she had just shaped the skill and confidence of soldiers whose lives would depend on her teachings. As she sat by the window that evening, the memory of the range still fresh in her mind, She reflected on the strange arrangement that had unfolded. It was not the life she had planned, nor the one she had once been given, but it felt right. Each Tuesday, she would walk the line between past and present, between secrecy and service. She would never again be fully known, but she would continue to make a difference. The soldiers would remember her lessons. Michael would guard her secret, and she would carry on as Sophia, the quiet woman in jeans who drove an old car and lived in a modest apartment, hidden in plain sight. Yet for those who trained under her, she would always be something more, a figure who appeared when needed and vanished when the work was done. Some secrets were worth keeping, Sophia thought as the city night deepened around her, and some teachers never needed recognition. Their legacy lived in the hands of those they trained, in the silent confidence of a soldier aiming steady under pressure, in the calm that could mean survival when the world tilted into chaos. Thus the legend of the ghost instructor grew quietly, unrecorded, unnamed, but unforgettable. And every Tuesday, with the soft hum of her car engine carrying her back to Riverside, Sophia stepped once more into that role, both hidden and eternal, a teacher whose name the world would never know, but whose lessons would live on.